Good evening, and thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Cynthia Guzman.
My name is Maya Reese.
We are both members of MEChA and undergraduates, students in the college here. On behalf of the resident staff and MEChA de UChicago, it is my pleasure to welcome you to International House and to tonight's public lecture program. This evening's screening of No Más Bebes and discussion with producer Virginia Espino and Ms. Consuelo Hermosillo is sponsored by the International House Global Voices Lecture Series, the Center for the Study of Gender and Sexuality, the CAT Center for Mexican Studies, University of Chicago UAID, MedLife at UChicago, Peer Health Advocates, the UChicago Pre-Medical Students Association, Global Med at the University of Chicago, the Guzman family, Law Students for Reproductive Justice, the Center for Interdisciplinary Inquiry and Innovation in Sexual and Reproductive Health, Resources for Sexual Violence Prevention, and University of Chicago Student Government.
If anyone at any point during the program needs to speak to a counselor about any feelings that are triggered, we have a sexual assault dean on call. Her name is Jen Kennedy, and she's standing there in the back, and she'll be in the iHouse office just outside the doors, and someone can assist you with that if you need help.
I hope all of you will return to International House to attend other Global Voices lectures and performing arts programs, which advances cross-cultural understanding and opportunities for civic discourse on community, national, and world affairs through music and dance performances, films, lectures, conferences, and roundtable discussions. You can find information about these programs on the literature table at the front entrance. Please be sure to sign up for the mailing list to receive announcements about all upcoming events.
Now I'm just going to speak a little bit about MEChA, the organization who is putting this event together for you. So MEChA stands for Movimiento Estudiantil Chicanx de Aztlán, and it's a student organization that promotes higher education, cultura, and historia. MEChA was founded on principles of self-determination for the liberation of La Raza, and we believe that political involvement and education is the avenue for change in our society. This screening is the second event of MECha's 2016 Latinx Heritage Series, an annual tradition which is our opportunity to invite speakers to UChicago to facilitate discussions that we as Chicanx students want to see taking place on our campus. We hope to create a dialogue with this year's theme titled Arte Popular, Narratives of Change, which speaks about the transformative power of art and narrative within the Latinx community. Arte Popular is presented as an alternative to academic scholarship and museum art, which can often feel inaccessible or removed from the daily realities of most Latinxes. By contrast, Arte Popular is art for and by the people. In a similar vein, the speakers that we have invited to this year's series produce their work to give voice to largely untold stories in an effort to affect change in the world around them. We are very excited to continue our conversation on this theme tonight with producer Virginia Espino and Ms. Consuelo Hermosillo. Ms. Hermosillo was one of the 10 plaintiffs in the court case detailed in No Más Bebes. Originally from Veracruz, Mexico, today she is the head chef for her son Oscar's string of successful restaurants throughout Los Angeles County. And Las Mechistas de UChicago have already come to love her for her warm hugs and huge smile. We will learn more about her story in the documentary, and we'll have the opportunity for discussion with her after the screening. Virginia Espino, producer of No Más Bebes, is a native of California, born and raised in northeastern Los Angeles. She is the program coordinator for Latina and Latino history at the UCLA Center for Oral History Research, and she served for a time as an associate professor at Arizona State University. Ms. Espino has been the recipient of the Woodrow Wilson Dissertation Grant in Women's Health, Ford Dissertation Fellowship for Minorities, Smithsonian Institution Minority Fellowship, Smithsonian Institution at the Inter-University Program for Latino Research Fellowship, and an Irvine Fellowship. She has served as a California Commissioner on the Commission for Sex Equity Los Angeles and a member of the Chicano Latino Education Committee Los Angeles. We are so grateful to have Ms. Espino here to share her work with us tonight, so please join me in welcoming her to the stage to introduce the film.
Thank you so much for inviting us to share this important story with your university. This is my first time on the University of Chicago campus. It's a beautiful campus. It's an honor to be here. and it's an honor to be here with Doña Consuelo Hermosillo, who is a brave woman to come forward 40 years later and tell her important story so that we never forget what happened all those years ago, and so that the new future generations can learn from this important history, because it covers many issues, and you will see once you've seen the film, and hopefully we'll have some discussions on around those many issues. But I'm from Los Angeles. I grew up very close to the LA County Hospital where these surgeries took place, but I grew up not knowing of this important history. I grew up not learning of Mrs. Hermosillo's bravery and the bravery of all the other women who took place in the lawsuit and who took place in the activism. I learned about this history when I was in graduate school. I was about 30 years old, and I was outraged that I could grow up so close to a place where this history takes place and not learn about it. So I decided that I wanted to share this story with as many people as possible. So it's such an honor to be here and many other campuses that we've traveled to share this story, to have a conversation about these issues, about reproductive justice, reproductive health, about our rights, about what it means to have bodily autonomy. Thank you.
Virginia and Consuelo, thank you so much for being here tonight. I'd also like to thank Yvonne, Consuelo's daughter, for flying from LA so that Consuelo could be here with us. What a moving film. I think we can all agree that you've had the bravery to put together for us. I'd like to thank you firstly for your work, because it's a story that needs to be told, but it's obviously a story that is very difficult to share. One thing that struck me most when I first saw the film, and maybe some of the audience members are feeling the same way right now, is just shock that not only did these women suffer these experiences, but you were also denied legal reparations in court. The film touched on the prevalence of the idea of population control in the political rhetoric at the time, and Consuelo, you left us with some very haunting questions about why would any doctor ever do this to a person? So Virginia, you've been researching this topic for several years, so can you start to explain how that could have happened? Why did those non-consensual sterilizations take place in the first place? And how could it be that doctors' good intentions could take precedence over the right to informed consent in a court of law?
Well, I'll just start with a little bit of history that goes back to the 1920s, the 1910s, when eugenics was really prevalent in the US, when there were legal sterilizations, legal eugenic sterilizations. Women and men in mental institutions were sterilized against their will, against their consent. And so that's a legacy that we have in the United States. And many people don't know, but Nazi Germany replicated some of their ideas based on what they learned from the US. So there are these ideas of prejudice, these ideas of who's fit to have a child, who's unfit, and sometimes our communities become the target of those policies. And so in the 70s, you had this idea, this kind of opening of the conversations around reproductive health. You have the pill, you have women demanding access to birth control, to abortion, safe and legal abortion. But all of that conflated into this confusing, well, it wasn't confusing, it was really a deliberate attempt to control certain populations who were viewed as not contributing to society. Our community has been targeted for that, the African American community, the American Indian community, Puerto Rican women in New York were also targeted for these kinds of sterilizations. And what we came to learn is that our labor is wanted, and I think we see that today, that our labor is wanted. People like our food, they like to celebrate Cinco de Mayo, but they don't necessarily want us. And so that's something that we need to look at as a country. It's like, who gets to be here? Who gets to have citizenship, who gets that kind of respect to make choices for themselves, how many children they want to have. So at the time that these funds were being funneled into the hospital, there was a shift in policy, and for the first time, President Nixon provided hundreds of millions of dollars to public hospitals for family planning. And that was a new episode in the history of the government being involved in the politics and policies of reproductive health. And so what happened, what was problematic, is that these kinds of procedures were being forced on women like Mrs. Hermosillo. These kinds of permanent birth control, sterilization procedures were being forced, pushed. Some women were shamed into agreeing, but there wasn't really an informed consent like you would hope. Although in the legal case, you could talk about the legal case and how could this be that they lost the legal battle. They had the sign. Some of the women did sign documents, but they didn't really understand fully what they were signing. And can you really argue that that is informed consent? Can you give your consent when you're laboring? Can you give your consent for a procedure that's not an emergency? There was no medical reason for sterilization. There was a medical reason for the cesarean section to save the baby's life or to save the mother's life. But you can't argue that the sterilization was a needed emergency surgery that had to be done at that moment. So is that really a consent, even though you have the paper document in front of you? So it was also different times. These were times when my husband interviewed Dr. Karen Baker for me, and she told him that when she was in medical school, there were very few women. So there were very few people of color becoming doctors at that time in the late 60s, early 70s. Very few women. She was one of 3. I think it was 3 that she said in a program of about 150 to 500. I can't remember the exact number. So these were different times, and people ask if it could happen today, and although things have changed, you have women who are becoming physicians, you have people like Gloria Molina, who becomes a prominent political figure in Los Angeles, but then you see the rise of someone like Donald Trump, and you ask yourself, could this happen today? And I think we have to be very, very careful and very wary that there is that possibility, because our communities are still not valued.
Consuelo, you made the very difficult decision to testify about your experience for the case, and you said in the film that you did it because you didn't want other women to have to experience the same thing you did. So why did you choose to share that experience again for the production of Más Bebes? What do you hope the audience members will take away from your story?
Well, the first time when they asked me, I was not sure of doing it because I was afraid. I was afraid, and I felt like I was younger, and I was like ashamed, like I have done something wrong, and I didn't want nobody to know what would happen to me. So I did say for the first time when they went and asked me, I said no, but they insist. Antonia Hernandez explained to me that even if I had signed the consent form, that wasn't a reason. And also number 2, that there was other ladies that some of them didn't speak English, and some of them didn't have their papers legalized, and said that they needed my support because I was one of them, that there was a stronger case with me. So that's what made me decide to go. But with the condition that I didn't want nobody to film me on the court. I didn't want it to come on the papers. I didn't want to be interviewed. You don't see me. You never see me, because that was something like I have done wrong, and I got over it a little bit after the second time they got in touch with me, and I figured out, because my son talked to me, and he explained to me that it wasn't something that I've done to somebody, they did it to me. And I want everybody to know that none of my family knew, not one. The only one that knew was my husband. And we never touched the subject like it didn't happen, only him and me knew about it. When I went to court, I found somebody to babysit. I lied, I told him that I was going to work, but I left my kids. She was 7 years old, and they were little kids, but I found a way how to support them at that time, and now I did it for my grandchildren, for my daughters, and also for the generation and the schools I see them. I've been going to a lot of colleges, and the reaction that I've been getting, the feedback that I get back, I'm very satisfied, and I'm so glad that I'm doing it. Even it past so many years, I think we should still be doing it for people to know that they still do it. They're still doing it, and if we don't do all these documentals and show the world that it's happening, then it's not going to stop. At least it helps a little bit. I hope I could answer your question.
So we saw in the film that the movement for reproductive rights in the 70s was led and redefined by women of color to include more than just the rights to abortion and birth control. And so just to give a little background on what reproductive right justice is today, the Asian Communities for Reproductive Justice has defined it as the complete physical, mental, spiritual, political, social, and economic well-being of women and girls based on the full achievement and protection of human rights, emphasizing that for Indigenous women and for women of color, it's important to fight equally for the right to have a child, for the right not to have a child, and the right to parent the children that we have. And there are plenty of aspects that go into supporting the vision for reproductive justice, such as equality of opportunity and social supports for individual decisions to be fully realized, government obligations to actually protect women's human rights, and access to choices that are safe and affordable. And Virginia, you mentioned how it's important for us to realize that these things could come up again today. And so after researching and completing this film, what do you think are the most pressing issues for us to focus on to make sure that reproductive justice is fully realized for Latinas today?
Well, I think it's different in every state because the laws are different in every single state. For example, in California, we have certain laws that provide for federal funds to be used for safe and legal abortions, but in other states, that's inaccessible. So you can have, for example, Roe v. Wade and legalized abortion, but do you have access to it? Can you afford it? Is it in a place where you can get there easily? You know, all of those things are important. So I think being aware of what the issues are in your respective state, getting involved in organizations like in California, we have a fantastic organization called the California Latinas for Reproductive Justice, figuring out what are their issues, what are they dealing with. There's a national organization, the National Institute, what is it? National Institute for Reproductive Health. This is Dr. Elena Gutierrez. She's an expert on reproductive justice, feminism. She teaches here in Chicago, and thank you so much for being here. Professor, author. She also wrote a book, Fertile Matters, that looks at this same case, the Madrigal case. But so that's what I would say. It's like find out what the issues are in your state. I know in some states there's pushback towards the waiting period, the 72-hour waiting period, because people are afraid that that's going to be applied to abortion access, and I think it is in some places being applied to abortion access, and it's a very real need to have abortion be on demand and quickly and urgently taken care of. If that's your choice, that's your decision. But in the case of sterilization, it's very different. It's a very different kind of situation that took place in those hospitals where women weren't given the chance to really think about, is this something, this life-changing decision, do I really want this to take place? Do I have time to think about it, consult with people? There are some women who are very happy with their sterilization surgeries. They advocate for that, they want it, they don't want to have any children. So I think it's the spectrum of reproductive justice is just accepting all of those different scenarios and being aware of what are the policies in your state, who are the legislative. I think voting, if you can vote, is a really important avenue to secure protections for women. And also think about the transgender community, what are their issues? That's what reproductive justice is looking at, the whole spectrum of sexuality. And that's what I hope the film helps us to have a conversation about, because when I started researching this back in the 90s, a lot of these conversations weren't taking place yet, and I wasn't really aware of the full complexity of the issue. And it was through this film, working with the California Latinas for Reproductive Justice, meeting young activists, that I became more aware of the various ways that we can fight for reproductive justice. It doesn't necessarily have to be simply abortion or simply anti-sterilization. It can mean many different things.
Thank you. Now we'd like to open up the floor for questions from the audience. There's a microphone right in the center aisle. If you'd like to ask a question, you can come up to the mic.
Hey, my name's Liam, and I noticed during the film there was one shot. It was a list of different universities and hospitals that received money from the federal organization that was associated with some of the sterilizations, and University of Chicago was on that list, which is insane. Do you think the same thing may have been occurring in the city, in the same university?
Well, I know for a fact that in Cook County, there was a pushback against sterilization, coercive sterilization practices that were happening around the same period. I met a woman at one screening who was delivering in the 70s at the Cook County Public Hospital, and she was bilingual at the time, and so she was trying to translate for some of the other patients and explaining to them that they were trying to get them to sign off on sterilization. And so they moved her out of that room where she was laboring. So yes, in Chicago there definitely are cases. They're not well documented, and that's really something for people locally to explore. I'm in Los Angeles. I don't really have access to the archives here, but Cook County would definitely be a place to start. I did a really quick search after I met her, and I couldn't find anything online. But there's probably local newspapers that would talk about coercive sterilization at the Cook County, I believe it's a general hospital, in the 70s.
Wow, that's really crazy. Thank you. And then also you said that the doctors tried to remove her from the room. Do you think it was more of a doctor-by-doctor basis that was kind of encouraging the sterilizations? Or do you think it was more of a top-down kind of process? I know that was kind of left a little bit unanswered in the film.
Yeah, it's really complicated. No, it's complicated because in some scenarios, you would have a social worker asking the women for consent. At a recent screening in San Diego, a woman came forward and told the director of the film, Renee Tajima Pena, the filmmaker, told her that when she was 14, she was volunteering at the LA County Hospital. And they asked her to translate to some of the women about signing over for sterilization. So they had 14-year-olds translating some of these documents for the nurses and for the doctors. So it's very complicated to actually point your finger and say this, let's blame all the doctors, let's blame all the nurses. It was just a complicated case-by-case situation. And I think in some cases, the doctors never met the patients. They looked at the legal document and performed the surgery. But in other cases, they might have been encouraging the patient. Like Dr. Quilligan said, I think it's perfectly fine. I think it's perfectly acceptable to ask a woman if you see she's had 6 children. That's his thinking. But we can disagree after seeing what has happened to some of the victims that no, it's not okay to ask somebody when they're laboring.
Thank you.
One of the things that comes to mind when I when I hear these stories and I think about this, is the recent, like, I think it was as recent as like 4 or 5 years ago that California again had to pass a bill because they were sterilizing women in prison. And it's one of those things where the state is always finding loopholes to target people that they have control over and people that the larger population can ignore, right? So like our mentally ill women, our trans women, our incarcerated women. And it's like, it's the kind of thing where how, I don't know if like in your research or in your, or activist work or any of the people you've met, like how can we protect those populations before the state like assumes control over their bodies and their rights, right? Because it feels to me like we always find out about these things years later when the damage has been done and the trauma has to be dealt with, right?
Well, we're hoping that that's what we're doing by coming out and talking to students about this history, by making the film, by encouraging the plaintiffs like Mrs. Hermosillo to come forward so that these kinds of stories aren't repeated. But there are also some amazing organizations out there. Justice Now in California is the organization that uncovered that this was happening because they work with women in prison, in the prison system in California. So there are organizations out there that you can be involved in so that you can take a proactive approach rather than reactive, like, oh, like what you're saying, it's like, feels like we're always reacting to things that happen to us. But the reason why we know about the California prison system sterilization is because of organizations like Justice Now. So I think it's important to get involved in a community that is doing this kind of work so that you feel like you are having a voice and taking part in preventing those kinds of abuses in the future.
And I also just wanted to say thank you for your courage and sharing your story. It's hard to put yourself out there, but it's wonderful. Thanks.
Hello. So in the film, I know it was mentioned that the basis for this type of stuff happening was to control population. But then you have like shows like 19 Kids and Counting that get praise in the media for how many kids they're able to have. So what are your ideas on that sort of dynamic, like praising certain population for having so many kids and the other side of sterilizing women so they don't have that many kids?
Not familiar with that show, 19 Kids and Counting. Is it a white family? I'm just gonna be frank. So it's a white family. So I think that kind of tells you that there's value on certain races, and we know that from ethnic studies, and MEChA, groups like MEChA were born to challenge notions about our community, about our people, and there's been historically a devaluing of our people, of our community, and not simply one based on race and ethnicity, but also one based on class. There's this idea that of the perfect middle-class family, and this idea was really prevalent in the 70s. There was definitely a promotion of not having any more than 2 children, and that was across the board. I think most people deciding to get married in the late 60s, early 70s were rethinking family and how many children do you want to have? What makes a healthy family? Well, 2 children for some people, because that way you could have your nice house. That way you could have your summer vacations. It'll be easier to educate them. So there were these different value systems placed on the good family, and having 3 kids, 4 kids was not considered that. I have 3 children, and sometimes I feel that kind of pressure, like, why did you have so many? If you would have only had 1, maybe you would be further along in your profession, in your career. People have told me that. So I think we still have some of those ideas that are placed on us, placing our own specific values onto other people. But when it comes to Anglos or European Americans, they seem to live by a different system of values because of who they are. Just look at, I'm going to bring up Donald Trump again, and his wife, who I don't think she will be the first lady, but the comparison between the way she's treated and the way some of the other female politicians are treated or their spouses are treated is just remarkable.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing your story.
Hi. I had a question about filmmaking. Like, why did you choose to present this story in the form of a film? And then also, were there any drawbacks or benefits to presenting something that's kind of as closed and sterile as a trial through something as intimate as filmmaking?
Well, I'm not a filmmaker. Renee Tajima Pena, the director, is the filmmaker, and she made a lot of those kinds of choices, the filmmaking choices. I'm the historian. It's inspired by my research, and I was able to do some of the interviews in Spanish and give some feedback. But things like filming in the hospital, that was her idea. I was more, as a historian, I was a little bit more hesitant of revisiting those kinds of traumatic scenes with the plaintiffs, because part of my role in the film was to interview the plaintiffs and be their connection to her, to Renee. Renee interviewed the doctors, and I never had a chance to meet the doctors. So it was this kind of interesting collaboration. She's Japanese American, and I feel like negotiating our different areas of study, hers filmmaking, mine history, made for this interesting balance. And the trial, well, that was such an important part of the story. It had to be incorporated. I mean, I think it kind of is the story in some ways, but what we found out while filming is that we didn't know what we were going to find when we met the families, and we found that the Hurtados that was a love story that they opened up to us in the process of meeting them and interviewing them. And Mrs. Hermosillo, she was, even when we came to talk to you about the film, I don't know if you want to talk about how she didn't want to participate, as she was very, very hesitant. So not giving her space and not pushing was part of the process.
Answering a little bit part of your question, why now? You don't see a reason, because it's very hard to understand the reason we do it. But like for you, the new generation, 40 years ago, you were gonna have a baby, they leave you in the door of the hospital, you go inside, and they do what they want with you. Right now, I saw my kids, they had their babies, their husband went right next to them. Anything to be done, they saw my grandchildren, I saw my grandchildren, one of them be delivered. And that's the reason also to see the changes from 40 years from now, that we have achieved a lot in the hospitals. Not only the sterilization is just to treat the woman in the hospital, that you're not alone. And a lot of details make me decide to go forward, and I'm still gonna do it, because I know even one person from 100 will have something in their mind in the future and say, you know, I'm glad I saw it, that this happened then. Well, it won't happen to me or to my sister or to my neighbors. So that's one of the reasons I decided at the last minute to do it. You know, and I'm glad I work, but I still take my time to go everywhere when they need me. And I'm very pleased and very happy to be able to transmit something that happened, and it's real. It's nothing like it's a story that it's something that the person could feel it, the young generation could feel it and said, wow, this happened, I didn't even know. Because it had happened to me. Cal State Fullerton, we had a lot of questions asked. They didn't even in their dream thought that happened. So I still think I did the right decision, and especially Renee and Mrs. Espinosa. Any other question for her?
We have time for about one more, or if you both wanted to ask them at the same time, that would work too.
So, sorry. So my question is a little about towards both of you. So I know you do oral histories and it's like your research. So I think I wanted to know, like, what do you think oral history has in the role of healing after traumatic events like this? Because I feel like often we know about these violences that happen to us, in this case, or in immigration, and we are ended up with populations who are hurting. And I want to know what do you think, what was your experience in kind of dealing with this afterwards, and what do you think your work has to do in this process?
Well, so oral history is the interviewing that we did. The interviewing that we did, was that healing for you, or what was the experience like for you sharing your story in a verbal way for us when we interviewed you that first time?
The first time, I felt like saying, I thought in my mind, they're still interested in something that happened, but the way they explained to me, and I recall the way Mrs. Antonia explained to me that it happened, I said, I think it's time for me to go forward. So I felt that I was ready to go, to support it, to support the film. That's how I felt.
How do you feel about the film and participating in the film and these kinds of conversations afterwards? Has it had any impact on you in any other way?
No, positive things that I never even dreamed that I was going to be doing this after so many years, and I was going to be able to be somebody that it could help, supporting the whole, supporting everything that you guys had worked so hard and put it together. And I feel very proud to be able to do it for everybody, so. And going places, I really feel that I'm doing something. I don't feel that it's a waste of time. They tell me, the last time my granddaughter went with me, this time my daughter said, "You're not going alone." I have a lot of support from my family. The support that they never knew before. The first time they showed the film in downtown, they were shocked. My grandchildren, everybody was shocked. My sisters, they hugged me. Everybody cried because nobody knew what I went through but me. Nobody. And even we're here and they can't believe it that I could hold so many years. So I'm glad I'm doing it because I'm getting that I hold for so many years. That's how I feel.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for participating in our discussion tonight. Thank you to our two guests.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.